Welcome, everybody. We are live, and it is Pi Day for those of you who are science nerds, 314. And for that, in celebration of that, we've invited Andrew Apicello, who is the Chief Business Officer at Sentauri, a STEM-focused startup. He's joining us today to talk about marketing in that industry. Andrew, what is on your mind these days?
Eric, thanks so much for having me on. I'm glad you asked. So I've been trying to think through an interesting one here. So I find that more than anything else I say to potential clients, I'm showing them complex data. They know all about this stuff. I'm showing them complex data and they say, okay, what should I make of this, right? And what I'm looking for is for them to say, I love this. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. Your data is amazing and I want your product. And that never happens ever.
Yeah. Have you met scientists before? Yeah, they don't do that.
Yes, the most skeptical people on the planet generally don't jump out of their seat when they see dots on a paper.
Occasionally.
It's happened before, but not when I'm giving presentations. And then also I'm thinking about, hey, when I say this competitive advantage, or I call out this problem that they have, or when I'm saying this pro to the product, whatever it might be, I'm always expecting that, oh, you know what? That's exactly what I wanted to hear. But I don't really hear it there. And an observation I wanted to share with you and talk about with you is when I have seen that, oh, that's it. Oh, I love Sentauri. Oh, I want to work with these guys. It's generally when Sentauri said to them, either myself or one of my partners is talking, they say, hey, this thing that's happening in the field, we don't like that. We don't stand for that. We disagree with that. And I think what's really important about what's happening there is we're saying, hey, we're on your team, or hey, we don't agree with what's going on there. That's the other team. And we're on the same side as you. We also don't like what's happening out in the market. And I think that when that happens, people find a lot of reason to agree with you, meaning that all of a sudden the data aren't just the data in a vanilla way, in a banal sense, but all of a sudden it's, oh, Sentauri is taking this approach that I agree with because they called out something I don't like. Therefore, bad data all of a sudden can be justified. And you say, oh, what honest scientists. They went out there with bad data. That's great. Or if they see good data and with someone that they like, they say, of course, my method always works. And on the flip side, if we're on red team and the others are on blue team, they say, oh, blue team came out with good data. They cooked it. They did something to make it look like it's nice. And then when they see bad data from the other team, they say, oh, of course, that was never going to work. What were you thinking? It was a terrible idea from the get-go. And so what I think that's pointing to is this effect that even in the most rigorous space, it's narrative that drives sales. Even in the most skeptical group of people, there's still this red team, blue team. We're still humans. It's still flesh and bone. So again, I'm just kind of reflecting on story and narrative and trying to get back to that style of marketing. And I'd love to know what you guys think about that.
So I think this is a fascinating point, and I think I will take what you're saying one step further, which is that I think fundamentally, and I've said this a couple of times recently, that fundamentally the currency of business, even more than money, is trust. And if you can get people to trust you, then they are willing to work with you. And if they don't trust you, they're not willing to work with you. And I would actually even argue as a recovering brand marketer that all brands are just it's just a shortcut for trust, right? And so that emotionality of how do I connect with you? How do I get you to trust me? And the red team, blue team you're talking about is a piece of that, right? If I can get you to feel like we're on the same side, we're on the same team, you will naturally have affinity for me and be more likely to trust me. I don't know if anybody else has a reaction to that, but that was my.
Well, I was gonna add to that. I mean, trust. Having been a science been in science, having launched a startup in science and selling a product, like trust in science is pretty interesting, right? Because trust in science requires that you're both trustworthy and that your science is working, and you have people who are going to just nitpick into every detail. In fact, I think it's like a sport in the biotech industry, probably in other science industries, to pick apart vendors' claims. I think that's just part of, like, you come in, that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
So I think building trust in science is a pretty it has some complexity. I'm just going to ask you back to you, Andrew, is what, when you've marketed or you've been involved in companies that are in science and are not in science, like, where do you, like, what is the difference that you're seeing in those spaces?
That's interesting. What makes science unique is that you have to build up so much trust before you get a sale, because the marginal sale is so high. And at the same time, there's not a lot you can do to verify and earn trust before a purchase. So there's not a lot a user can do to validate your claims ahead of buying your product. And even something like a pilot, which is extremely common in this case, it can still be in the 5-figure range. And not only that, it's not just a money thing, it's also an investment thing, right? The second some C-suite executive says that he or she is going to be working alongside Sentauri, they're putting their own brand right on that. And if they have to talk to the board. So the second it doesn't work out, now they have to go to the back of the board, and that's not a good day, right? So if the pilot doesn't kind of pan out. Now, that being said, there is a lot of kind of forgiveness in the scientific realm because it's science. It won't, even if you were perfect as a vendor, it won't work all the time, right? That's why you have to be so careful about your claim. And just to kind of finish the point, I think what has resonated with people across both, scientific domains and kind of generally, has been that a respectable and honest claim, even if it's less than the competitors, is actually seen by the clients that you want as a far more valuable offering. Like, no one wants to see something guaranteed that they know can't possibly be true. That just automatically reduces trust, Jeff, as you kind of said.
So,
Eric, that's
Andrew, I was gonna jump in with, okay, so you're talking about this trust and how it takes a long time to build, and I absolutely agree with you. But from the position, and obviously I have my own thoughts on this, from the position of a startup that's trying to build that trust and build clientele, etc. This long sales cycle it can be frustrating at times, but it is a reality, right? I mean, 6 months sometimes is like a short sales cycle. Sometimes you need to spend years convincing people that to work with you. How do you think about that? What's your thoughts and your team's thoughts on building a startup in such a long a long sales cycle mode?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say reflecting on what's been successful has been, when you're a startup, there's no product. And you can point to a website or you could point to your technology, but no one cares. Like, that's not what matters. People aren't buying that because that's ephemeral, potentially, because you're a startup. They have no idea if you're going to be around. When people are buying your product and you're a startup, they're buying your story. They're buying your brand. And so you have to apply the same reasoning to great marketing to a product as you would to yourself and your own energy. And, a lot of times, we go out into the world and we just act the way we do in society and in common social situations. And sometimes you'll have somebody who everybody thinks they're a 7 out of 10, right? And sometimes you'll have somebody who is someone thinks out of 10 people, one person thinks they're a 10 and everyone else thinks they're a 1, right? There's this landscape of how people react to you. And what I found was really being the way I was, really just being who I am, that puts me far more in the secondary landscape of someone's going to love me. And most people are going to be like, Andrew's not understand. Right. But the sale happens at 9. Like the sale only happens at 9 and above. And so if 10 out of 10 people think you're a 7, you'll get nothing. Right. Especially early on, because you got to own your brand. This is the same thing as you would for any product. Right. And how do I think about it? I think about, kind of owning your idiosyncrasies. I think about it as having the courage to own your convictions, build the company you know is right, and just ignore all else.
So I have a question, Andrew. There is a concept called product-led growth, right? Where there is enough footprint is generated by the product itself for people who promote it, such that it can be discovered, right? And move your potential prospect down the funnel by them reaching out, by asking, by, engaging and whatnot. In a science environment, how do you build that ecosystem that showcases your product?
That's really interesting. So it's very hard to do. I would say early on, so Sentauri spent basically 4 years, just nights and weekends of the founders, right? Just what if we did this competitive advantage? What if we did this competitive advantage? What if we tried this strategy, that strategy? And kind of just churned for years and years. And it was really those early on connections that we had, people who trusted us, right? Whether it be PIs from grad school or just people like Eric that I happened to run into, which is a great story into itself, actually. But you start to see these people, right? And then all of a sudden, you start to turn those people that you've built trust with, not as a client, but as just people in the space that you're trying this, you're getting after it. And all of a sudden, a couple of years go by and they say, this guy, you know what, this guy Andrew's for real. This Sentauri company's not going anywhere. These guys are doing it. Let me put them in touch with some people. Because you know what? They had that. Remember, Andrew, you had that competitive advantage from 2 years ago that you tried and it maybe went up or down or who knows? Well, actually, there's someone I know who was really interested in that. And let me put you in touch with them. Okay. And then now all of a sudden you have your first prospect at the very top of your funnel. And that's, again, it's almost like, look, this is not the first footprint on the moon by any stretch of the imagination, but the first one is the hardest one by what is it? How many thousands of miles it is from here to the moon, right? The first one's the hardest one. And then everyone after that is more difficult. It is difficult rather, but it's not nearly as difficult. The marginal step is much easier.
I always like in the marketing perspective, particularly like with Citadel, my former company and so forth, was like, you want to convince people that they're not the first idiot to take a shot on you. It's kind of like the goal.
That's exactly right. And to that point,
I said, and yet somebody does have to be the first, right?
Well, and but to Andrew's point, and this was my experience too. And by the way, Jeff, this is our experience at Twinning Edge as well, is you get over that by personal connections that you've formed maybe outside of the company, from previous people you've worked with and referrals and whatever. You have to kind of make that trust through different ways.
Yeah, I would say, just to put some punctuation on that, the first client that Sentauri ever had, we did some really good work with this company out in San Francisco, and they're not our client anymore, but I still have a great relationship with the CEO. And I wrote to her, this past Christmas, just, hey, again, thanks so much for taking a shot on us. Like you that meant so much to us. And I just want you to know how appreciative we are of it. And again, that's kind of ties to both of the last 2 points, right? Just people buying your brand and people, really being not the first fool, so to speak, really, you don't want to be the last fool as on the stock market, but being the first fool is not so bad.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit because there's a couple of really fascinating things. I mean, I'm sort of relatively new to the BD world because I was in corporate marketing roles for most of my career, and then in the last year building businesses and whatever. And it's been really, really fascinating. Like early on, Eric and I actually both read this book probably a little over a year ago. It's called "You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bicycle at a Seminar" by a guy named David Sandler. I don't know if you know Sandler, but anyways, it's a really excellent book. I just recommended it to somebody the other day, and it's all about sales, but basically what it boils down to, and he's not the only sales guru that ever said this, is that you have to ask questions more than you give information. You have to get information from the person you're selling to more than you give information to them about what you do. And it's fascinating because I'm starting to find that when I have conversations with prospective clients and I ask them questions for 45 minutes or whatever, the result of that is often like, oh, nobody's ever asked these questions before. And then they're like ready to sign up. It's like, just because you know the right questions to ask. So I'm wondering if have you come across that phenomenon? It's sort of a fascinating thing that it seems counterintuitive, but it just seems to be true. So
I find that to be 100% true. It always is more true than I think it is, even when I think that it's true. Right.
Right.
There's this great experiment that this woman did. I forget her name, but maybe someone on the stream knows it. But she did this experiment when she went to a conference and she put like a piece of tape over her mouth. And she had like a card, I forget exactly what it was, but it was like, hey, I'm doing an experiment. That's all it was. And she went to the conference and she just had to listen to everyone. And people obviously wanted to talk to her because that's a little bit different, right? That's a little weird. People talked to her, and then there was something unique about this event where they had like, who was the most interesting? What was the most interesting conversation you had? And she won. She didn't say a word. She won.
I've heard similar stories to that where the people who are often judged the most interesting are the ones that let you talk.
Yeah.
It's really
interesting. And actually, if you go all the way to while I'm like doing last century's books here, Dale Carnegie, right? Is more.
I had influence people.
Right, yeah, but more important to be interested than interesting. Is I think that's Dale Carnegie.
I think this goes to what you were saying, Andrew, about like you want people to feel like people are on the same team as you. Well, how better to make them feel like they're on the same team than actually to show, like, I actually think what you're saying is important. And actually, I don't know. I think that it all kind of ties together.
That's exactly it. That's a chef's kiss, Eric. That's Italiano. Like, that's perfect. Like, yeah. What
was that? Cultural appropriation. I'm sorry.
What's
apologize.
No, that's it. You are saying to them, you're not saying anything to them. You're showing them, I value what you have to say. I'm here. I'm on your same team. How could I not be on your same team? I'm sitting here listening. You have my full attention. I mean, that's it. That's 100% it. I also would say that you have to be interested more than you are trying to be interesting. That's certainly true. I also think that they always go hand in hand. It's just which one are you going to show on the call, right? You want to show interested on the call. Right. But I also find that people who are interested in things are the most interesting people. They always go hand in hand. Right. I'm fascinated by, I don't know, looking around my room. Stories, actually. I got a whole book of, it's like something like 12 books to set of fairy tales and folklore from every single continent, from every single, Mesopotamia, Egyptian, Native American, all of them. I don't know. It's like a fine wine, sitting in my desk. I'll read them all one day. Maybe some lullabies and
There's a nuance though that I wanted to drill into there. Showing interest is absolutely is essential, but it's also we're dealing in science with complexity. Like, these are complex products, right? These are products that not everybody is going to understand what you're offering. You may not understand the biology or whatever of the biotechs or the targets of the biotechs. Like, how do you come to that meeting of the minds that feels like you're listening, but actually, allows you to acknowledge that these are really complex conversations sometimes that need to be had.
Yeah. You know, you gave me this thought because on my meetings, I'm the business guy. I'm not the scientist in the room, right? It generally falls to other people to have the technical expertise. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to make the sale at the end of the conversation, right? You still got to say the thing that, you know, is going to either mature that relationship or it's going to be over aggressive, right? So you got to gauge what's going on. And there's this concept that I like to use of like in the musical world, you get to learn an instrument. Some people are good at a specific instrument, you know, the technicality of it, the articulation of certain notes. But there's also a separate skill entirely, which is just musicianship, which is unlike the specific instrument itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And musicianship is infinitely transferable between anything, right? And kind of more generalizable across a bunch of different areas of cognition. And I found that, you know, as I learned guitar, I increased my musicianship. But so when I switched to singing, it was easy enough, right? I could just kind of jump right in, or piano or whatever it is. I can jump right in and say, okay, I know almost everything, you know, as far as theory that I need to at this point. I don't know everything about theory, but enough to know, hey, this is where we're going. And now transitioning back over to the domain of science, there's a skill of the specific technique that we're talking about today.
Right.
And the intricacies are unbelievable and beyond my skill to comprehend within the limitations of that meeting. So what I try to focus on is the scientific skill. In the same way that there's musicianship underlying the specific instrument, there's also the skill of science that's underlying the specific technology.
Scientistship.
The scientistship. Yes, your ability to be a scientist, your ability to say, okay, well, what was the control exactly? Was that a positive or negative?
Right,
okay, negative.
right.
All right. Okay, we're working in this way. Is that reasonable or not? You know, does that make the case, or does that not? Does that actually fail? You know, is that the right hypothesis to draw currently? Could we do a titration here? And just trying to engage in that level of thinking and then translate all the specific ideas that are being discussed for that technology and place them within that larger framework of science.
So I'm gonna jump in because I got actually DeepSeek wanted a chance this week to ask some questions.
Oh, DeepSeek. Okay, I've never interfaced with DeepSeek. I'm excited.
DeepSeek, I would say the only one that's been sort of weird when I ask it, like relative to ChatGPT, which I guess I consider the norm now, is the only one that's been a little weird was Perplexity. When I asked it, I always asked for funny questions, and it gave me dad puns. I mean,
I always get knock jokes.
I appreciate that.
I know you do, Eric, but all right. So, how about this one? Well, actually, I always like to ask: do you want absurd first or thought-provoking first?
Oh, I don't know. Which way are we going? Are we gonna try to reel it in at the end here? Or are we gonna try to blow it out and just go
whatever?
It's up to you.
Okay, let's go thought provoking. Let's start reasonable, and then let's just.
All right.
Great. Bucking the trend there.
If your product, this one's going to sound absurd, but I think it's really thought-provoking.
Okay.
If your product had a dating profile, what would its bio say, and what would it be looking for in a perfect match customer?
If my product had a dating profile?
Yes. Yeah. Like, what would its bio say?
If your product was on Tinder, would it swipe left?
Because it is DeepSeek, it actually has a little asterisk underneath that says, in parentheses, this is a fun way to get them to describe the product's value proposition in a quirky and relatable way. So it's like explaining the joke. So I don't know.
Oh, geez.
Which is kind of very dad joke too, you know?
That is.
Well, I always know that I've done a good job with thought-provoking when I make the guest pause. I mean, that's the essence of thought-provoking. You can if you want.
I feel like our product is it's like a guy who grew up as a surfer bro. And then one day he was like, that's enough. I think I'm going to go to Wall Street. And then just did it. And then just made it happen. Yeah, that was enough. That was enough. And so like, while there is that polish, that grit, it's just like, it's rigorous and it works and it's supposed to be all these things. It also has that it's never lost that tenor of, hey, just come talk to me. Like, we're here. We're having a great time. It's supposed to be accessible science. It's supposed to be, not a pain to use. It's supposed to say, hey, let's actually clean this all up. Been there, done that. Let's make everything.
I think this is a new tagline for Sentauri. Sentauri, like a surfer bro who went to Wall Street.
Went to Wall Street. Yeah.
And why Wall Street and not MIT?
Not MIT. Oh, it's a little too cold.
Got it. Okay.
I don't know if I wanted to say that to all the balls.
Even Wall Street is warmer than MIT.
A little bit.
It's in the city,
It's cold for a degree or so. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens in the next couple of months with MIT. But anyway, but all right. So here's I don't know if this is a absurd question, but it might elicit an absurd answer. Is what's the most ridiculous analogy you've ever used to explain your technology to a non-technical person?
It's like a surfer bro who that one was
perfect
right there.
Perfect example.
I have answered both questions.
I actually always use the same analogy, and it's always, I actually have one for this.
Okay.
So the analogy I usually use is, making medicine is like a lock and a key. You got to find the key for the lock. The lock is the protein and the key is the molecules. Got it. All right. We all know that one. The most absurd analogy I ever gave was, we put lightning into rocks to make medicine. And that's like,
did you get that sale? Just curious.
Yeah, what was the response?
I think it was in the same situation here. Someone was like, just blow me out. Just say something crazy to me. I'm like, well, let me just describe a computer in the most inane way possible. And then essentially, what's the
You're like, okay, you went for it. I like that. You get points for that.
Okay,
okay. I have a question. And I know your team, Sam and Jack.
Great guys.
I've known you for a while, but and so this is a little bit of a loaded question because I know there's something behind this, right? Which is there's a tension between science and marketing, right? There's the tension of you want to be able to push a product out and sell it. There's whereas the scientists might be like, it's not ready yet, or it's not perfect, or whatever it is. How do you think about that tension between scientific perfectionism and, marketing, business needs, etc.? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that tension is just a part of the team, right? Like, that's just your offense and defense. They just have those poles. And so it's just a part of doing business on a scientific team. And that exists in the same way with product and sales, just outside the scientific discipline as well, across manufacturing and across software. So I saw that from the other side as a CTO at my previous position, and that actually gave me a lot of insight into what it's like to be a product manager, what a product development officer. And I think that tension is, to bring it kind of full circle here, is resolved by patience and trust. I mean, ultimately, that's what you need to do. These two different departments have different goals. I mean, when it comes to the messaging, even science is trying to be thorough, whereas marketing is trying to be compelling. The details. I mean, science is trying to be extremely detail oriented because the details matter, and marketing is trying to be short and concise. Right? Everything is. I mean, this is a polemic. Everything is exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. And you get the best products when, from start to finish, from defense to offense, from goalie to center forward, you have the whole team aligned on one vision. And I think that's best. I mean, it starts with trust. It goes from there to understanding. It helps to have played both sides of the ball. And I think where it ends up is with traction, just great communication between the two people. Hey, science, this is where I'm at. This is what we got going on. Here are the problems. Here's what we tried today. Here's where we're going. Here's expected time. But you know how open-ended of a question that can really be. Marketing is saying, hey, I have these financial goals. I need to hit these numbers. I think that this is what is happening out in the market. I think this is what it can bear. This is what the competitors are doing. And there's that constant negotiation that has to happen. Again, at the end of the day, it's a human process.
So maybe we have time for one more question, or if we don't, it's too bad because I'm the one who usually gets to decide when we're ending the episode. But what I'd like to ask this question of founders, and we've actually had a fair number of founders and startup people, entrepreneurs on our show. What's the most surprising thing that you find about being an entrepreneur, startup founder?
Oh, that it's possible at all. I just I actually am living my dream. I really didn't expect that. I just thought I was just going to keep failing. And I remember I was encouraging someone else to kind of get into entrepreneurship before I really, was successful. And he was like, well, it sounds like just jumping off of a cliff instead of into water, just onto dry land and just plummeting into certain death. And I was like, yeah. And I'm like, I did it like 3 or 4 times at this point. Yeah. And I said, I guess I just like jumping off of cliffs like that. I just like doing this. And I'm just lucky enough to be able to do it. The fact that it would ever be successful, that's awesome.
So, it's funny you say that because I've said this to Eric many times over the last year and a half since I jumped off a cliff. And
good for you.
Is that like to some extent, part of the real challenge of jumping off the cliff is that on the way down, like it's more like jumping off a cliff blindfold. Like on the way down, the feeling that you have when you're about to land on like the rocks and the dry land and the feeling that you have when you land in the water is exactly the same. And you have you do not know. And so this is the real, to me, I think like the most interesting thing that I've learned in this little journey is that you have to kind of like, you have to just continually have faith that there's water down there and that when you land that it will be okay. And because if you don't, it's almost like you manifest whatever if you decide that there's rocks down there, you're going to hit the rocks. If you decide that there's water down there, eventually you just keep falling until you hit water. Right. I think I've taken this analogy way too far. But I do think there's just something to be said for the willingness to keep trying and keep changing and whatever. I mean, since I keep bringing up other people's books, there's a book that Eric and I often talk about, which is Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution. I don't know if you've ever read Yuri Levine's book.
I've heard good things.
Yeah, but just that idea of that you have to keep tweaking the solution to fit problems that people really have, I think is, and so when you figure out that your solution doesn't work, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to be like, oh, well, I just ran into the rock. So you go, okay, I got to just try another solution. I just bounced off a rock. It's not the bottom. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, that's it. No, keep the analogy going. You're going to hit every rock on the way down. You just got to keep going. Like, I think back to Ryan Holiday, who's a big communicator of Stoicism, especially Marcus Aurelius. I mean, that's the book on my Marcus Aurelius' Meditations is the book on my nightstand. Yeah. And his book, the title of his book is what Marcus Aurelius said was, "The obstacle is the way." Like, this is the problem, right? It's, the second you kind of get out of it and you
Mandalorian say that? Sorry.
Did Mandalorian say that? I mean, that's cool.
It's a joke. I thought
this is the way. This is the way. Yeah, that's what he said.
This is the way.
This is the way. Well, the obstacle is the way in this case. But no, this is the problem that we've chosen as founders to try and solve. This is it. And, the more and more I realize, you're just in work, that once something is solved and it's a business process that we understand, and we're no longer in, you know, customer discovery, we're now in, you know, the sales cycle. You know, that's a part of my job to do that. But the part of my job that I love is the entrepreneurial part. It's the okay, but what about this different product? Is that going to work? Like, let me go back into the muck. Let's go walk back in the darkness. You know,
Yeah.
and it's nice to be able to do that with.
It's not figuring out your corporate taxes. That's not the best part.
Oh, that's dark. That's dark, but in a different way. We've been everything. We've been LLC, S Corp, C Corp. We've been everything. We've been everything.
Oh,
so
cool. So you know all of the ins and outs of that. Well, Andrew, we could probably keep talking to you for hours and hours, but I'm sure you have other things in your busy startup schedule and life to do. So before we go, what we'd love to hear from you and from all of us is one thing that you want to leave our audience with. And the one thing I never tell the guests before the show is that I always make the guests go first. It's kind of a hazing ritual. You don't get any time to think. So, Andrew, what's one thing you want to leave our audience with?
Well, first, thank you for listening. That's awesome. I really appreciate that. And the thing I'd like to leave you with is, I don't know. I think that the obstacle is the way is the number one thing. I mean, find that problem, trust yourself. If the theme of the day is trust, it's got to go inward before it can go outward. It is possible.
Awesome.
Well, Andrew, before I jump in with my one thing, if people want to reach out to you, people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Oh yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I actually check it. I actually really like LinkedIn. It's really fun. So Andrew Apicello.
Likewise. I think I'm totally addicted to LinkedIn. Anyway, that's a different episode. I guess for me, I don't know. I guess I gotta go with the jumping off the cliff thing. I mean, like, you know, yes, it's jumping
Get in there.
and basically having faith that eventually you will find the water. I think, you know, that's the thing, whether it's science or marketing like Eric and I are doing or whatever. So that's my thing. I will pass it over to Elena. What's your one thing?
Mine would be the trust and the importance of trust to win that client and the importance of listening to build the trust. So that's my big thing.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with that ultimately business comes down to the personal, the human interaction. I think, Jeff, you were saying maybe before we started recording it, like you have to, you know, you have this logic and emotion, and ultimately to buy something is based on emotion. And that's an interesting interplay with science where you have to get the facts right. That's part of building that personal relationship, is that they believe that you're going to be one, you know what you're doing. Two, you're going to be honest about what you're doing, because the science doesn't lie ultimately. We may get it wrong, but the science doesn't lie. So that's kind of my thing, is that even in this highly technical field, you have to create that personal connection of trust and an emotional connection to why somebody wants to spend their money or risk their reputation, you know, to bring some startup on board as a scientific partner when their CEO is looking over their shoulder and whatever it is. So, Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show. This is fantastic. And, you know, these always fly by, but we're going to, obviously I get the benefit of talking to you almost every week, if not multiple times a week. But we'll keep in touch, and as Twinning Strategy, we'll keep in touch and keep following Sentauri and see how things are going. So thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.